Welcome to Lecture 2 for COM 540. Remember that our goals in this course are 1. To learn the general principles of visual design, and 2. To focus their application on the context of science and technology. To that end, in this lecture, I'd like to take up some of the general principles of perception and Gestalt and apply them to some technical examples in the U.S. patents. Recall some of the principles that explain human visual perception. 1. We search for focal points. 2. We see things within a visual field. 3. We discern what's in front from what's behind in terms of figure-ground contrast. 4. We lose clarity when figure-ground contrast is degraded. 5. We understand a unit when we can group its subunits. And 6. We use principles of similarity and separation to help us group visual units. Also note that with few exceptions, like the IKEA instructions, visual design for science and technology is always in support of words. Thus, any assessment of visual elements must also refer to textual elements. Now, you would think that by the 21st century we would not need a design for a better mousetrap. George Lamb, on the other hand, the holder of U.S. Patent 6739086, thought otherwise. His design calls for a bucket that's been electrified with 9,000 volts so that mice are electrocuted and fall into a pool of water. When you see his diagram, it's hard to imagine any of this approach to pest control for several reasons. First, in spite of the various visual elements, there's no focal point here. A diagram of a mousetrap should draw our eyes to the main point of interest, a mouse. Second, without a depiction of the mouse, we have no sense of scale. How large is this rectangle in the center, for instance? Third, the plethora of dashed lines and curved arrows creates visual noise that detracts from our understanding of the elements. And finally, the strictly two-dimensional view here makes the figure-ground distinction a bit ambiguous. Now, from catching mice, we move to catching bad boys. David Shimesh's patent 6782847 offers a way of surveillance using electrified dogs, among other things. His diagram, although much more complex than the previous one, also lacks a focal point because of its complexity. What should we focus on here? The terrorists? The dog? The cooling towers? The figure-ground distinction here is clear because of the use of perspective, but the grouping of subunits into units, the similarity of human forms, and the separation between the main scene and the subscenes are all a bit compromised because this diagram is trying to tell the whole story all at once. Now, from the threat of terrorists, we move to the threat of airborne contaminants. The holders of U.S. Patent 7255627 offer us a design for a brassiere that converts into a face mask. I don't make these things up, really. Go to uspto.gov and see for yourself. Okay, maybe I made up the one about the IKEA document, but the rest are really true, honest. Now, this diagram has a very clear focal point, the dark patch that represents the filter. The figure-ground distinction here is a bit ambiguous, however, because the visual conventions of light colors advance while dark colors recede is violated. The principle of repetition is used to good effect. The light straps and the dark patches are easily discernible as our eyes move from the bra to the mask. Finally, from the grave matters of threats to mice and men, we move to comic relief. Joe Armstrong, in his patent 6293874, describes a contraption that can be used to kick butt, that is, your own. Again, I'm not making these things up. As absurd as this invention seems, the diagram in the patent is remarkably clear and understandable. The focal point is especially apt, the area just off-center between the shoe and the buttocks. The figure-ground distinction is optimum as a result of the highly abstract quality of the pure line drawing, and the visual field is made evident by the use of a stage-like setting. So, needless to say, the quality of visual elements is variable in the U.S. patents, as they are in all other formal documents. However, I think we can see how the general principles and concepts of visual design are helpful in assessing such visual elements. This concludes Lecture 2.